Sophie had never been one to shy away from tattoos. They were, to her, a form of storytelling, ancient symbols etched in ink that carried meaning, memory, or defiance. Her skin was already a mosaic of art, a delicate swallow on her wrist, a cluster of stars trailing down her shoulder, a phrase in faded script across her ribcage. But nothing she'd ever worn could prepare her for the mark that appeared that cold autumn night. She had gone to sleep as usual, the soft hum of the city outside her apartment window mingling with the distant honks and footsteps. Her dreams that night were unlike any before, disjointed images of shifting shadows, curling smoke, and a man whose face was covered in swirling ink, dark, alive, moving like liquid darkness. When she woke, the soft morning light filtered through her curtains, painting her bedroom in muted gold. As she stretched, her eyes caught a dark smudge on the palm of her hand. At first, Sophie thought it was a pen stain, something left from the night before. She rubbed vigorously with soap and water, scrubbing until her skin was raw, but the mark remained. It was no ordinary ink, it was intricate, curling lines forming an elaborate pattern that was foreign to her, yet unnervingly familiar. The mark seemed to pulse faintly under her skin, cold and almost alive. She traced the delicate filigree, and a shiver ran down her spine. That night, the man returned. His face was a living canvas of black ink, swirling patterns that shifted and writhed, forming grotesque and beautiful images that pulsed as though breathing. His eyes glowed faintly beneath the darkness, vast and bottomless like a void. He said nothing. Instead, he watched Sophie with a calm, almost reverent intensity. In her dream, he reached out. Cold fingers brushed her skin. She woke with a start, gasping. On her wrist, a new mark had appeared. This one was sharper, darker, and unmistakably real. Sophie stared at it in disbelief. The ink was spreading. Over the next days, Sophie's skin betrayed her. Vines of black ink crawled from her wrist to her forearm, twisting and curling in patterns both beautiful and sinister. Jagged shapes appeared along her neck, creeping up towards her jawline. On her cheekbone, an inked blossom had blossomed overnight, a dark flower blooming on her pale skin. She tried everything to remove it, scrubbing, acids, even harsh chemicals, but the ink only deepened, sinking further into her flesh as though claiming her. Strangers in the street stared. Friends recoiled. The tattoos seemed to breathe beneath her skin, pulsing faintly when she was alone. At night, Sophie's dreams became a nightmare. The tattooed man returned, his ink shifting and alive. He traced the lines on her skin with ghostly fingers, each touch sending cold ripples through her body. A voice, barely more than a whisper, slithered through her mind, "You belong to me now." She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. The whispers followed her waking hours, faint and unintelligible, murmurs curling from the tattoos themselves. Sophie felt watched, haunted by the ink. Isolated and terrified, Sophie stopped leaving her apartment. Her reflection became a stranger, her face obscured by the living ink, eyes dark and hollow. The tattoos grew, creeping across her skin in endless, twisting patterns, veins of darkness pulsing with malevolent life. One night, the ink on her face moved. Her mirror smiled back at her with an eerie, ink-stained grin. Desperate, Sophie sought out an old tattoo artist rumored to know forbidden ink lore. His studio was a shadowed place filled with relics and faded drawings. He looked at her and said, "This is no ordinary curse. The ink is alive, ancient, hungry. It doesn't leave." He attempted removal, but the ink resisted flame and blade alike. Sophie's skin was a living canvas of shadows. The tattooed man appeared behind her reflection, smiling with dark eyes. Sophie disappeared one cold, dark night. All that remained was a mirror, smeared with ink, and a whisper carried on the wind. "The ink is still wet." Mark's life had always been orderly. As a software engineer, he thrived in logic, structure, and predictability. The world was composed of neat problems with clear solutions, lines of code that obeyed commands. Yet, nothing could have prepared him for the nightmare that crept into his nights and slowly devoured his reality. It started as a dream, an eerie, suffocating vision that woke him gasping. He found himself standing at the entrance of a labyrinth, but it was no ordinary maze. The walls bent and folded in impossible angles, corridors looping back on themselves like an Escher painting come to life. The bricks beneath his feet were damp, stained with rust-like smears, and pressed against them were faces, pale, gaunt, twisted in silent screams. Their mouths moved soundlessly, voiceless cries of desperation. Mark ran, frantically, but the labyrinth never ended. Every turn took him deeper. The corridors shifted behind him, rearranging like a cruel puzzle that fed on his fear. And then he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, close behind. He spun around. There was no one. Except himself. A pale, hollow-eyed version of Mark, trembling in fear. "The maze keeps the lost," whispered a voice, his own, fractured and broken. Days passed, and the nightmare clung to Mark's mind. He tried to dismiss it as stress, fatigue, the residue of a bad horror film. But the maze refused to release him. Sleep became a battleground. The faces from the bricks haunted his reflections. Shadows lengthened unnaturally in his apartment, crawling toward him like living things. His friends called, concerned by his gaunt appearance and distant eyes. When he tried to explain the nightmare, their polite smiles faltered, replaced by looks of pity or disbelief. Doctors prescribed medication. Therapists offered explanations of anxiety and sleep disorders. But none could touch the growing darkness inside him. One night, in the dream maze, Mark found a door. Old and cracked, bound with rusted iron, hanging askew on creaking hinges. The air smelled of earth and decay. With trembling fingers, he pushed the door open. Beyond lay an endless void of absolute blackness. From the depths came a voice, a whisper so cold it froze his blood. "There is no escape." The walls around him breathed, inhaling deeply, exhaling a rancid breath. The faces pressed harder, their silent screams shaking the very ground. Two glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, unblinking and merciless. Mark's reflection in his cracked mirror fractured. The hollow-eyed figure stepped out, a doppelganger stalking the edges of his vision. It whispered lies and mocking laughter, feeding on his despair. One night, Mark awoke to a shadow looming over his bed. He was paralyzed, unable to cry out. "You belong to the maze," hissed the voice. But when he turned on the light, nothing was there. Driven to desperation, Mark searched ancient texts and forbidden lore. He uncovered stories of a curse, a labyrinth that trapped lost souls for eternity, feeding on their fear and regret. Armed with this knowledge, he vowed to escape. In his dream, Mark arrived at the maze's heart, a vast chamber filled with mirrors. Each reflected a different version of himself, the scared child, the angry youth, the lonely man. He reached out to one mirror. The glass shattered, pulling him into darkness. "You must face yourself," the voice whispered. Mark confronted his deepest fears and regrets. Memories of lost friends, shattered relationships, harsh words left unsaid. The maze convulsed and twisted, light piercing through cracks in the darkness. Mark screamed and awoke to sunlight pouring through his window. The nightmare was over. Or so he thought. The mirror in his room was cracked. And in its fracture, the hollow-eyed Mark stared back. The maze was not done with him. Sometimes, in the corner of his vision, Mark glimpsed shifting walls, heard silent screams, felt cold breath on his neck. He knew the truth. Some mazes never end. And some souls never escape. Lena had never been afraid of the dark. She'd spent childhood nights curled beneath heavy blankets, listening to the creaks and sighs of the old house she grew up in, finding comfort in the familiar shadows. But something changed the night the dreams began. At first, they were vague, a flicker of unease, a sense of being watched. But the dreams soon took shape. Every night, she was drawn into the same room, a room she'd never seen while awake. The wallpaper was cracked and faded, stained with age and neglect. The floorboards groaned under invisible weight. In the farthest corner crouched a shadow. Not quite a person, but not just darkness either, a shifting form with no edges, no face, no features. It did not speak or move, only waited, silent and patient. Lena felt its gaze burning into her, cold and hungry. She tried to scream in the dream, but sound caught in her throat. Tried to run, but feet were leaden, stuck to the floor. The shadow crouched closer, and she woke gasping, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. At first, she told herself it was just a nightmare. Stress, she thought. The pressure of her job, the endless deadlines, the isolation. But the dreams persisted, relentless as winter. Night after night, the same room, the same crouching shadow. Days bled into restless nights. The line between dream and waking blurred. Lena's apartment grew colder, shadows lengthening unnaturally as dusk fell. The corner of her bedroom, where the wall met the floor, seemed darker than any other place. Sometimes, when the light caught just right, she swore she saw a silhouette crouched there. The scratching started next. At first, subtle taps against the plaster, soft, like fingernails trailing the walls. It startled her, but she told herself it was the building settling. But the scratching grew louder, more frantic, moving closer. One night, she awoke to a sharp scrape at her bedside wall. Her breath caught as she saw a dark shape crouched in the corner, impossibly black, a living void absorbing the weak glow from her lamp. Her blood ran cold. The shape didn't move or speak. It merely waited. And the air grew thick, suffocating. Lena's world became a landscape of fear. She stopped sleeping in her room, opting instead for the couch under a blanket of harsh lamplight. Friends called, concerned, but she pushed them away, afraid they'd think her mad. In her waking hours, she felt eyes watching from dark corners, shadows shifting just beyond her vision. The whispers began, soft, unintelligible murmurs curling from the walls, a voice like dry leaves skittering across a graveyard. One night, she heard it clearly. "You invited me." The words echoed inside her skull, cold and accusing. Lena's heart hammered as she faced the corner of the room where the shadow had crouched. "Who are you?" she whispered. Silence. Then, a slow, deep rasp, "I am what you hide." Driven by terror and desperate curiosity, Lena searched for answers. Old books on folklore, urban legends whispered by locals, anything to explain the shadow that haunted her dreams and waking life. She learned of entities that fed on fear, creatures summoned by unwelcome thoughts and buried guilt, manifestations of the dark places inside a person. She realized the shadow was more than a dream, it was part of her. The darkness she tried to bury. One night, facing the corner again, she spoke aloud, "If you're part of me, what do you want?" The shadow stretched slowly, uncrouching into a tall, thin figure made of pure darkness that seemed to breathe and shift. "Accept me, and you will be free. Deny me, and I will consume you." Lena's skin prickled with cold dread. She clenched her fists. "I won't let you take me." From that night, Lena's dreams turned into a battlefield. The shadow pursued her relentlessly, stalking through endless dark corridors and twisting rooms. She ran, hid, screamed in the void. Each morning, she awoke more exhausted, drained, pieces of herself fading. The scratches on her walls grew jagged and deep, as if carved by claws. The whispers became voices, pleading, mocking, screaming. One night, in the dream world, the shadow cornered her in a room with no doors or windows. "I am the fear you refuse to face," it whispered. Tears stung her eyes. "Then teach me." Let me understand. The shadow hesitated, then touched her forehead. A flood of memories, pain, loss, and regrets poured into her mind, the lonely nights, harsh words, mistakes she'd buried. She sobbed. The next morning, Lena awoke with tears on her cheeks. The room was bathed in dawn's soft light, the corner clear. The shadow was gone. But inside her, something had shifted. She felt lighter, freer, as if a weight lifted. Though the darkness lingered in her mind, it no longer haunted her dreams. Because some shadows only disappear when you face them. Yet sometimes, in quiet moments, Lena catches movement from the corner of her eye. A flicker, a whisper, a shadow crouching just beyond the light. And she wonders, did the shadow ever truly leave? Or does it wait patiently, forever at the edge of her vision, a reminder of the darkness inside us all?